I'm really deeply sorry that you live in a world that doesn't exist. There is no evidence of that for Roger Stone. You have to like Roger. You don't have to like his tactics. But I suggest Roger Stone should sue anyone on TV who says that he was a middleman between the Russians, WikiLeaks, and Trump, because it is not true. Trigger warning here for the libs. You know, I know you all have a tough time. Roger Stone got his sentence was commuted. Roger Stone was is a known Republican operative. He's been in Republican circles since the Nixon days as a behind-the-scenes operative. Listen, he's known for being an edgy kind of operative who can, you know, get into some things that a couple people might be like, huh, that's Stone. But Roger Stone was attacked ruthlessly by the Mueller team because of one reason and one reason only. Roger Stone decided at one point to engage in the dastardly act of, you know, providing some of the Trump team people advice he thought would help them get elected. Oh my gosh, you got to throw him in jail. Of course, you know, he lied. We'll get to that in a minute. So President Trump on Friday commuted his sentence. Roger Stone put out a video subsequently of him dancing to Tone Loc's Wild Thing. That's on my social media feed, which is, I'm not kidding, which is hilarious. Roger Stone actually has some moves. He's in his 70s. And the liberals promptly lost their minds. That, you know, Joe, they're tyrants. Liberals want people in jail, yes, the guillotine, anyone who goes near Trump, because that's just how they are. They're all anti-free speech tyrants. That's what they do. So in response, the broken, fully discredited now, just a disaster right now, Bob Mueller, decided it'd be a good idea to write a Washington Post op-ed because it wasn't good enough that he humiliated himself and embarrassed the whole country in a 2-year escapade trying to prove a collusion hoax he knew from the start was a hoax. That wasn't enough, Joe. Now he's got to pile on at the end. Remember Bob Mueller, who didn't even know who Fusion GPS was? Yeah, Bob Mueller. Yeah. So Bob decided to put this Washington Post op-ed out. Robert Mueller, Roger Stone remains a convicted felon, and rightly so. Seriously, folks, I'm not even sure Bob Mueller knows who Roger Stone is. Based on his last testimony up on Capitol Hill, I don't think he wrote this op-ed. I'm not kidding. That's not a joke. It's not like one of these Biden jokes we make when Biden loses his place in the middle of a sentence. No, this is real. I'm not kidding. I think someone slapped his name on that. I don't mean it's some conspiracy. I mean, like he probably knew they were going to slap his name on. I have no doubt Bob Mueller, just like his report, he knew nothing. Remember the Mueller report? They were like, Bob, how do you feel about Fusion GPS? He was like, what? Huh? What's that? Fusion, let me ask the real Jay Solo. What Fusion GPS? Maybe he's a reporter. I don't want to get the fake Jay Solo. Let me ask the real Jay. What's Fusion GPS again? Bob, Fusion GPS, you know, the company that paid for the dossier thing you were supposed to be investing. Dossier, not my purview. Now, what was your purview, Bob? Was anything your purview? So he decided to fake write this op-ed. I doubt he even wrote it. Someone wrote it for him, and he slapped his name on it because, again, he can't stay out of this case because he's just been humiliated over and over again. So the fascinating thing about Bob Mueller going after Roger Stone again in his nonsense op-ed is Bob Mueller is now a fully discredited political hack. You know, oh my gosh, service to the country. Thank you. I mean it. That does not absolve you from making really dumb, stupid decisions, which you've made over and over, Bob. Bob Mueller engaged, let's just remind everyone, Bob Mueller knew two things when he started this investigation into Trump. Bob Mueller knew this case was a hoax. Dan, he's a decorated public servant. We're not allowed to attack his credibility. We're not. Even though he engaged in remember my second book on this, Exonerated, where I go through in detail how Mueller knew the entire time this thing was a hoax? Yeah. What is it, almost 200 pages of it? You can't read that book and come away with it thinking anything other than the fact that Bob Mueller was engaged in an unbelievably unethical, immoral investigation. How do we know that? Because when Bob Mueller was just a few months into his investigation, did you know they spoke to the translator at Trump Tower who was in that meeting with Don Jr.? You know, the meeting where they alleged the Russian collusion may have hatched? The translator who was in that meeting with Don Jr. and those Russians, Bob Mueller's team spoke to the translator. Oh, you didn't hear this? You didn't hear this on CNN or MSNBC? You missed that? Because there were actual notes. But you never heard about what the translator said, did you? Well, here's what the translator, Anatoly Samachornov, actually said about the meeting between Don Jr. and the Russians. You know, the one the liberals... Bob Mueller knows this, by the way, because his team is the one who interviewed him. Check this out. Here's the notes from the meeting. This is the translator who was in the meeting. with Don Jr. Quote, there was no smoking gun, according to Summer Chornoff. There was not a discussion about dirt on Hillary. And the translator, Summer Chornoff, did not think Hillary Clinton was mentioned by name at the meeting at all. Summer Chornoff had not heard the Russian Veselnitskaya say anything about having dirt on Hillary. And Veselnitskaya did not offer any materials during the meeting, and no papers were exchanged. Additionally, there was no follow-up to the meeting that Summer Chornoff knows about. So just to be clear, the high and mighty Bob Mueller, how dare we criticize? How dare you? Engaged in a 2-year Russian collusion investigation centered on a meeting Don Jr. had with 2 Russians where none of the things actually came up about Russians, Russian collusion, or Hillary. Just checking, because Uncle Bob knew that because his team's the one that did the interview. You didn't hear that in the media anywhere, did you? Highly ethical, Bob Mueller. Sure. What else did Bob know? Well, Bob knew that the FBI in January of 2017 met with Christopher Steele, who wrote the collusion dossier. And in that meeting, he met with Christopher Steele's primary source, who allegedly gave him this information. The FBI interviewed him. Uncle Bob knew this. Surely Uncle Bob knew that the FBI in January of 2017 interviewed Steele's source, and the source must have said, yeah, man, this stuff is all true. The PP tape, Trump colluding with the Russians. He knew that, right? Let's listen to Lindsey Graham, who kind of knows about that January 2017 meeting. Here's an interview with the great Cheryl Atkinson. Check this out.
The thing that Cheryl intrigues me the most is in January 2017, the primary subsource, a Russian, who prepared all the information to give to Christopher Steele to go in the dossier, was interviewed by the FBI and the Department of Justice. There were 4 people in the interview, and he basically told them, according to the Horowitz report, this is bar talk, it's not reliable, I never meant it to be used this way, I can't believe you're getting a warrant based on this document.
Okay, so just to be clear, op-ed writer for the Washington Post, Bob Mueller, who wants to, again, double down on his bogus investigation, started an investigation knowing all of it was false, everybody debunked it, and that every source involved, including people involved in actual meetings, had no evidence of Russian collusion at all. But let's defer to Bob for his expertise. You know Bob, who didn't even know what Fusion GPS was. Real champ, Bob Mueller. I'll never forget seeing him in the airport at Reagan, coming back from a meeting in D.C., and him dropping his head in disgrace as he walked by me. I will never forget that. In disgrace, walking by me. Stared at him right. He's tall. He's a big guy. Stared him right in the face the whole way down. Probably peeking out of an eye, just to make sure I wasn't still staring. Now, the media, of course, is still pumping this. Roger Stone, oh my gosh, we got to get this guy in jail immediately. Joe, he was the one. He was the conduit between the Russians and Trump. He was. So the media has evidence. I've heard it all over the place, including discredited MSNBC hack Chris Hayes, suggesting again that Stone was some kind of Russian collusion intermediary. There's evidence of that? Roger Stone, you know, whose sentence was commuted, there's evidence that Stone was an intermediary between Trump and the Russians. Where's that evidence? I haven't seen that. I want to hat tip Aaron Mate, who had these screenshots up on his Twitter account, who suggested that if you believe Roger Stone was an intermediary to the Russians and you have evidence, that maybe you should tell the Washington Post and New York Times. Wait, what? Yeah, some of the same leftist radicals who are telling you that Roger Stone was an intermediary to this Russian collusion scheme probably read these papers that have already reported that that's not exactly true. Let's go to Washington Post piece number 1 here. Fascinating. Washington Post, this was from a while ago. Randy Credico, who was a friend and an ally of Roger Stone, Credico flatly rejected a claim that Roger Stone made to Congress, that Credico was a secret intermediary to WikiLeaks and Assange. Wait, that's the Washington Post? He conceded that he promised to reach out to WikiLeaks on Stone's behalf, but testified that he never did. That can't possibly be true. We've been told Roger Stone was this big-time intermediary between WikiLeaks, the Russia. He coordinated the whole thing, but he never even spoke to them, as reported in the Washington Post. Oh, just checking. Maybe someone should tell Chris Hayes. I'm sure he reads the Washington Post. So, Joe, definitely other people confirm this, that Stone was the intermediary. He's the middleman the middleman for
Yeah,
this big
sure.
conspiracy. He's coordinating everything. WikiLeaks, Russians. Roger Stone's got Putin in his back pocket. So Randy Credico, his own friend, said, nah, it's not exactly true. We were all lying about that. So secondly, definitely someone else confirmed this. Maybe Steve Bannon, right? Steve Bannon, who knew these people. So let's go to the Washington Post article number 2. On cross-examination by Roger Stone's lawyers, Robert Bushell, Bannon conceded that Stone never claimed to him that he had advanced access to the hacked emails. Washington Post. Isn't that crazy? So Stone hasn't talked to Putin, was not coordinating with WikiLeaks, and didn't have access to these emails. Again, I'm not I don't know Roger Stone. I met him once at a Fort Lauderdale event. I'm simply suggesting to you that the media, again, is lying to you about what Stone did because he didn't do what they said he did, as reported by some in the media themselves that were forced. You may say, why are we crediting the Washington Post? I'm not. They had to report on this because this was sworn testimony by Bannon and Credico. They couldn't lie about it. Someone raised their right hand and said, here's the whole truth. You may say, well, definitely the New York Times has evidence that Roger Stone was he was the big colluder, He was the Hadron colluder. Isn't there a collider out there? He's the Hadron colluder. Definitely the New York Times has evidence. I'd like to see that then too, because this is what the New York Times had to report themselves. That, quote, in fact, Mr. Stone, a former campaign advisor, had no real ties to WikiLeaks. Oh my gosh. Isn't this crazy?
Yeah.
Again, folks, if you're listening to Chris Hayes, left-wing media, and others out there, I'm really deeply sorry that you live in a world that doesn't exist. There is no evidence of that for Roger Stone. You have to like Roger. You don't have to like his tactics. But I suggest Roger Stone should sue anyone on TV who says that he was a middleman between the Russians, WikiLeaks, and Trump, because it is not true.
You just heard Dan Bongino.